One morning, Peppa Pig's house was noisy and fun. The sun was shining outside, and the kitchen smelled of warm pancakes. Peppa was sitting at the table, swinging her legs. George was munching on his pancake, and Mama Pig was turning the next one in the pan. But then Daddy Pig came into the kitchen, holding one red shoe in his hands, and said in a puzzled voice, "Family, I have a problem. I lost my other shoe." Peppa immediately jumped up from her chair. Lost a shoe. It's like losing a dinosaur. We have to find him. Mama Pig looked at Papa Pig and smiled. "Dad, are you sure you didn't leave it somewhere in the garden? You were digging the garden beds yesterday." And when George heard about the dinosaur, he shouted joyfully, "Gee!" Peppa laughed, looking at her brother, who was waving his arms like a real dinosaur. "George, the shoe is not a dinosaur." "Dad, let's look for it. It's going to be an adventure." A dinosaur. And so the whole family went in search. They looked into the living room first. Daddy Pig turned over the sofa cushions, and an old Candy and Georgia's ball fell out, but there was no shoe. Then they checked the closet. In the hallway, there were old umbrellas and Mama Pig's hat, but the other red shoe was still missing. Then Peppa suggested, "Maybe he's in the garden. Let's go there." It was warm in the courtyard, and the breeze was stirring the grass. Daddy Pig was stomping through the garden beds in one shoe, and Peppa and George were running around, peering under every bush. "I'll find him first," Peppa shouted, jumping over a small puddle. "I'll find it," George objected, crawling under the bench. Daddy Pig scratched his head and said, "I'm sure I left it here somewhere. Maybe he's buried in the ground. I'm a great gardener." Mama Pig laughed. "Papa Pig, you are a great gardener, but shoes do not grow in the garden beds." And suddenly, George froze. He stood at the sandbox and shouted joyfully, "G-R-R-R-R." The shoe. G-R-R-R. Everyone ran up to him. The tip of a red shoe was sticking out of the sand. Peppa immediately grabbed a shovel and started digging. Wow! George found him. How did he get there? Daddy Pig pulled the shoe out of the sand and looked at it in surprise. The shoe was covered in sand, and inside was a small toy crab that had been missing for a long time. "Oh, is that my crab? I thought he'd gone to sea." Papa Pig exclaimed, laughing. "It looks like your shoe has become a crab's home," Mama Pig said, looking at the sandy find. Peppa giggled. "Dad, you lost your shoe, but you found a crab. This is the best adventure ever." But the story didn't end there. George grabbed the crab and ran to the sandbox, and Peppa decided to check the shoe again. She shook it, and a small shiny coin flew out. "Look at this. It's a treasure," Peppa shouted, holding the coin above her head. "Wow, my shoe is a real treasure," Papa Pig said, putting it on his leg. Pig's mom brought lemonade from home, and the whole family sat down on the grass. The sun was warm, and George was building a castle in the sandbox, putting a crab on top. "I like to look for lost things," Peppa said, sipping her lemonade. George agreed, slapping the sand with his spatula. "And I think my shoe is a bit magical after all," Papa Pig added, proudly looking at his shoes. "Let's go finish our pancakes, adventurers," Mama Pig called, smiling. So they all went inside, laughing and chatting. Peppa and George argued for a long time about who was the best treasure hunter, and Papa Pig carefully placed his shoes by the door so that they would not get lost anymore. George and I love adventures and shoes and crabs. Everyone loves to find treasures, Peppa said, jumping up and down. So another fun day went by at Peppa Pig's house, and the little crab stayed in the sandbox like a real king of the sandcastle.